This meeting is being recorded.
You can start.
All right, good morning, everyone. Sorry, before I start, I think I'll need a couple of mics to be turned off because I can hear some mics in the background. So if you can just mute yourself, I would appreciate that. Okay, thank you so much for that. Good morning, everyone. My name is Olivia Wambi, and today I want to talk about sequencing activities in a project. This especially is for beginners in project management, but also intermediate level will be benefiting from this because this is something that we face every day, but we are not able to really navigate our project when it comes to sequencing of activities. Now, everyone is how should I put this now? Everyone subconsciously creates or sequences activities every single day. It ranges from things like you cleaning, you going to work, you prepping yourself to start working from home. So all of those steps that we usually take to complete a full task is what we actually call like sequencing activities. So whether you do know it or not, you are actually familiar with basic project management skills. So I'm trying to, yeah, okay. So when we discuss or when we talk about like what sequencing activities are, it's just a way to identify or document relationships among project activities. So I'm going to be using examples that we experience every day just to make us understand what this really is. And the main purpose of sequencing activities, especially in projects, is to finalize like interrelationship between activities to complete the project scope and ultimately reach the project goal. For myself, I would say for every single project manager, without stating the level, the purpose of you sequencing activities in your project is to just help manage your team, help manage your resources, and also help you identify critical tasks and prioritization of tasks as well. So I would say that most of us are familiar with projects. Some of us are handling projects. Sometimes we handle projects without actually knowing that that is a project. And some of the ways that we do that is we get the project code. So the project code simply contains what is needed from you. You also get the objective, which is the outcome. Sometimes we forget to find out what the objective is. And that actually makes things difficult to sequence activities. Because if you know the scope and you don't know the objective, then you aren't seeing the bigger picture or what the final output or what the final product is supposed to look like. So how do you sequence activities for a project? Well, you have to define relationship between activities first. And there are a lot of ways to do that. But I'm going to talk about the most familiar and the most go-to approach. And that's called the precedence diagram method. And this method uses something called network diagram. When you talk about network, it's just a way to visualize activities in a box. You have the IDs, you have the interrelationship being shown, sometimes mostly with arrows. And with this in mind, let's just see how this is supposed to look like and what it really pertains. So what you can see on my screen is just a diagram, like a sample diagram of a network. So you have the start, you have the arrows, you have the activity, and hereabouts. So these boxes you see here just represent the activities of the project, and the arrows represent the dependencies of these activities. What I mean by dependencies are simply things that would not work without the other. So from what we have here, we can see that activity 1 would have to be completed before activity 2 and 3 start. That's what the arrow is just trying to say. And you can see that there is an arrow from activity 2 down to activity 5. That arrow is simply saying that activity 5 is dependent on activity 2. So without activity 2 being completed, you cannot start activity 5. Now, bringing it home to talk about something that we are familiar with. Let's say, for example, you want to make jollof rice, which everybody is familiar with. To make jollof rice, you have to first of all get your rice. You have to get your tomato, your pepper. Let's just call them your ingredients. So first thing you need to do, most persons would maybe wash the rice, and others would prefer to boil the rice. But the thing is, you cannot get the end result of your jollof rice without adding tomato. So that's like your final output of getting a jollof rice is dependent on you adding a tomato into your pot. So that's the same way how activities also work. There are some things that are dependent on others. There are some things that would actually work on their own. And there's other tasks that would need to be done side by side. I know that for some projects that most of us will be handling, would have experienced something like that, where you cannot begin a project. Sometimes you cannot begin a project without getting the UI design and then shown to you. That's because you have really an idea of what you need to do, but you don't have the visualization shown to you yet. So that's really how sequencing activities works. Now, some of the steps to sequencing activities, we're just going to talk about 3. That's the first one. You need to define your activity attributes, and it's just about you naming and assigning that activity in number. You can also write a short description and so much more. And also each activity must have like all the same attributes defined and notes in order to sequence them accurately. That simply means you need to start off on a project. Let's say, for example, you want to design a sign-up page. For you to start off designing a sign-up page, you have your UI ready. Your UI for that task, you can just name it activity 1. You have a sub-description, UI design to illustrate the login page or the sign-up page, and these are a couple of features that would need to be added. So like your username, your email, and thereabouts. That's just what we mean by you defining your activity attribute. And another is to determine your constraints. So most tasks come with constraints. Almost every task comes with constraints. And constraints are simply things that limit that task. It can be things ranging from resources, time, costs that you need to work with, and a lot of approval as well, and more others that you can work with. So just like you defining your activity attributes, when you determine your constraint, it actually gives you power over your project. And you're able to tell where there are some constraints, you're able to work in such a way that you do not reach those constraints as well. So that's really what we mean by determining constraints in project sequencing. The last is identifying dependencies. And this means that without you knowing exactly how tasks are related, there really is no way to sequence them appropriately. That's why we advise every beginner in project management to always ask questions. It's very important for you to ask questions because sometimes you're not getting the full picture. You don't actually know what needs to come first and what doesn't need to come first because it's just your first time handling those projects. For example, using the same sign-up page, you know that yes, the end goal of this task is to create a working sign-up page. But how do I go about mapping, my task? How do I go about just sequencing my task so that my developer can really fulfill on this? Maybe the developer has an idea of how to go about this, but you as a project manager do not. So you need to ask questions. And it actually makes it easy for you to schedule tasks and really set up your program, you set up your project for success. But when you're not able to sequence them properly, your project ultimately fails, your project suffers, and then you do sign up yourself and your project for failure So some of the best practices when it comes to sequencing activities are creating a complete task list before you sequence activity. You need to consider your team's load. You need to know the difference between mandatory and descriptional constraints, and you need to not neglect constraints as well. So what am I really trying to say? When we talk about you creating a complete task list before you sequence your activities, it means that when you're working on a project, there are new and unexpected tasks that will naturally crop up along the way. Some of us will have noticed this over time while working, and some of us may not have noticed this, but please keep it in mind that this will occur. And the best way to begin sequencing your activities is to work with all the information you have at the time. And even if you know a tax would, probably produce like more tax down the road, you really need to just factor those into your tax list. And sequencing activities begin as the best possible rough draft that you can clean up along the way. So sometimes some of us, I would say, kind of put down things on our Google Docs, just a sort of flow that we have. And you kind of, the flow you have is just for yourself, just for you to understand more. So those drafts you put up is also a way for you to sequence your activities. Why? Because when your team start working on a project, once a task is completed, you actually take that up and you're cleaning up the draft as the project progresses. Another is you considering your team's work. This is very important. That's why while using the agile methodology, it's very important for the team to have what we call transparency. And that's because you need to identify constraints while sequencing activities. And if you often overlook constraints, which is like your team members' workload and the time they use in completing more of those tasks, you find out that you're able to really navigate through your project constraints. But when you neglect all of those information, you neglect how much time you have in the day, how much one person will be able to achieve within those times, you actually have like setbacks, you have burnouts, and the activities take longer time to complete. That's why it's very important for the team to communicate. If there are any sort of problem, I would say, along the way, something that will make you not finish off a task in a day, or a sort of delay that may happen, or a bug that you may face, that's for developers. The team needs to be aware of this. That's because the project manager's job is to make sure that tasks are completed on time, which would ultimately lead to the project being completed on time. So we all need to consider our team's workload while we are sequencing our activities. And next, you need to know the difference between mandatory and discretionary constraints. And it really, to accurately sequence activities, you must keep in mind that there isn't just one type of constraint. There are different types. There are just two types, like I said, and they are very different from each other. Mandatory constraints really are concrete constraints, and you cannot work around them. And I know that some of us have noticed things like that. While descriptional constraints really are flexible, they're really flexible constraints, and your team can decide on them while they are scheduling the project. So sometimes we have activities where you can work on two activities at a time. They are not dependent on each other. They do not affect each other. So the team can decide to work on maybe the first one or the second one, and there is no problem with it. But when it comes to mandatory, it simply means activity A can really, rather activity B can not be worked on until activity A has been done, it has been completed, reviewed, and then marked as done. And the last is for you not to neglect task constraints. And really, from what I said, from what I've been saying so far, you can imagine that while you're neglecting task constraints, it's one of the most detrimental mistakes you can make when you're sequencing activities. That's because if you ignore things that would affect your project and you don't find a way to make those things not be an issue, they tend to become an issue in the future. So it's very important to take the project management triangle into account. And that triangle really revolves around three constraints, which are scope, time, and cost. So no matter what you do while you're sequencing activities, while you're working on a project, you need to make sure that everything works within this triangle. And sequencing activity is a very involved process, really. And it's not difficult to forget, like, the broader constraints of the entire project, because some projects are really large and some others are really small. So you need to keep these things in mind, and they would really make a difference, or they would make the difference between your project success and your project failure. So before we go down to the question, because it's not really much, it's a really short slide. So I don't know if you have any questions. Or if you don't have any questions, I'll just ask my questions. They're not really much. So the floor is open. And if you don't have any questions, you really can just say no questions as well.
So if you have any question, please just ask. I guess no one ask question.
Yes.
Good morning. Yes, my question, because under the part where you say best practices when sequencing activities, we should know the difference between the mandatory and discretionary constraints.
Yeah.
So that is where I need more light. Knowing the differences, yes.
All right. I mentioned that mandatory constraints really are constraints that you cannot work around. So that means that if you have a task that needs to be done, and let's say you have a couple of tasks that needs to be done. So I'll just go back to this. Let me use this figure. So we have this diagram right now. And when you say the mandatory constraints, we're going to use this arrow right here. I don't know if you can see my screen properly. We have 3 arrows on this line, but you can see that arrows from activity 2 goes to activity 4 and activity 5. Now, the one that goes to activity 5, simply that is really a mandatory constraint. It's just saying that before you can work on, before you can work on activity 5, activity 2 needs to be completed no matter what. So same thing for the description, and that's just things that you can work around. It's things that, if let's say using 2 and 3. So you can work on activity 2, you can work on activity 3, no problem whatsoever. So that's really a way to really tell which is which. And it's really important that you kind of find out which constraint and which is the other. That's why it's very important to ask questions. Most times we cannot tell because you might be, especially when you're working with developers, you might not be able to tell. So you need to ask questions like, can you do like task A before task B, or you cannot do that, and other times you can also map out these activities with the help of a team lead, like a developer team lead or a senior developer as well. That's if you're working with developer, if your task or your project has to be centered on you working with developers. I don't know if you understand.
I'm clear, I'm following.
Okay. I don't know if you have any more questions.
Any other question? I guess you can just ask your own question.
Okay. So my first question is, who should sequence activities in a project? That's my first question. Anyone can answer.
I think the project manager, the one handling the project.
Yes, that's correct. The project manager sequences the activities. Thank you for that, Aldo. And my next question is, what do you think is the purpose of sequencing activities? From what I've said, you can just say it's what you actually got from my presentation.
Good morning.
Good morning, everyone.
Yeah, so my sequencing activities will make it in order. So by executing one task from another in a sequential way.
Okay. I think you actually gave us the definition of sequencing activities, but we want to really know why you do that.
It will make the projects. It will make the project go in order.
Okay, go in order. Yeah, that's correct. Does anybody have any other things to add?
All right, good morning. I think one of the purposes is it makes you takes one step at a time by finishing one phase of the project, then moving to the next phase. So it gives you a clearer picture of what you're up against, I think.
Yeah, that's also correct. Do anybody have any other things to add? I really want to hear what we think is the purpose of sequencing activities. Okay, Dafa, I think you might be on.
Okay, yeah, good morning, Olivia. Good morning, everyone. So from what has been said already, for me, I feel that the purpose of sequencing these activities is to enable one have a detail, what should I say, just to have details of every activity. So when you have details of every activity and every process, it also enables the manager and the people involved to know progress achieved and challenges yet to be solved. That's
Yeah, that's also correct. Thank you, Ridwan, Audu, and Dafa. So my last question is, just mention one way to sequence activities in a project. So I think I mentioned more than one way, so you can just, anybody can answer. Just one method to sequence activity in a project. I think I mentioned just one.
Okay, define the activity first. Is that correct?
That's the best practice when sequencing. But how do you, let's say, for example, you have like a math question. So there are several ways for you to solve calculus. So you have different methods to solve calculus. So it's the same thing, different method. I mentioned just one, and we showed the sample of the one I mentioned as well.
About the network.
Yes, network diagram. That's correct. So it's called the precedent diagramming method, and it uses what we call network diagram as well. So that's really all from my end. Please remember, at any time if you start handling any project and come across any roadblocks that you feel you can handle on your own, you can reach out to your team lead, you can reach out to your team mentor to better help you navigate through that roadblock. Thank you, everyone.